Hi and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. It's Science Fiction Saturday again. And I've got two science fiction movies from 1977. 1977 was a particularly pointy year for science fiction in cinema. George Lucas did his film, and so science fiction cinema changed forever. But I thought I'd look up my reference Bible and see what other films were made in that genre in 1977. And you may argue that these films are not science fiction. I'll argue they are. And I'm going to keep the criterion simple, whether something is science fiction or not. And to do that, I'm going to use this. The Overlook Encyclopedia of Science Fiction, which is a big chunky thing, going for incredible amounts of money on eBay these days. And this one is what I'm using for my reference. If a movie appears in the Overlook Encyclopedia of Science Fiction, I'm going to say it's science fiction. You can disagree if you like, please do. It helps engagement if you put a comment in saying you disagree. But I'm going to give you the reasons why each of these are science fiction from my viewpoint. The two movies are very different. The first one is a parable of the backlash against the 1960s youth culture. And the second one is a science fiction eco-horror film, which I would argue is one of the best of its era at doing that. Let's start with the first one, 1977's Blue Sunshine, directed and written by Jeff Lieberman. And it's a weird and wonderful film. It has a feel like a 1970s, 1980s Larry Cohen film. It stars Zalman King as a guy called Jerry Zipkin, who's at a party with some friends. When one of his friends goes berserk, someone tries to stop him and his wig falls off, and it turns out that he's got severe alopecia. All of his hair and his eyebrows are falling out, and he is maniacally strong and homicidal. He tries to kill some friends. He succeeds later on. He flees the house and then comes back and succeeds in killing some friends, including putting a woman into a very large fireplace. Jerry gets blamed for this because of reasons, and he goes on a quest to find out what's going wrong. And as he does, he finds out other people are suffering from the same malady. They're losing their hair. They're very sensitive to loud noises. They're irritable. They're cranky. And eventually they become homicidal with maniacal strength. There's a woman who is the ex-wife of an aspiring politician, a guy called Ed Fleming, played by Mark Goddard from Lost in Space. And he has a particular connection to the problem at hand, which is a 10-year-old dose of LSD called Blue Sunshine, which was distributed by Ed at the time when he was a drug dealer at Stanford University. Blue Sunshine, over the 10 years since the people took it, has altered their chromosomes and has given them this weird phenomenon where their hair falls out, they're very sensitive to loud noises, they're irritable, and they eventually become murderous semi-zombies who can't be argued with, who are very difficult to stop and who just want to kill. It's a weird backlash to the counterculture of the 1960s set in the 1970s. There are a number of movies that did question and reference the counterculture of a decade before. Movies like The Big Fix with Richard Dreyfuss, where he plays Moses Wine, a detective who was a hippie in the 60s, dealing with the changes in society in the 70s. In 1983, there was The Big Chill, where a bunch of old university friends get together and find out their lives aren't quite what they wanted them to be. There was a pivot point at about 1977, where the hippie counterculture and the peace movement and the communal living and the free love and all that kind of thing was being severely questioned by American society. Now, the movie goes through a path of Jerry, who's a very weird character. Zalman King was a weird actor. He only seems to have one gear in his acting gearbox, which is kind of befuddled anger and fear. He encounters a number of people. He's got a kind of sort of girlfriend who helps him with the investigation. He's got a friend who is a doctor, played by Robert Walden, who was in the Lou Grant TV series along with Ed Asner in the 1980s. Jerry's worried that his doctor friend has Blue Sunshine Syndrome, but it turns out he doesn't, and he helps him by getting him some strong tranquilizers to put into a dart gun with which Jerry can sedate any Blue Sunshine people that he comes across. He does come across Ed Fleming's ex-wife, who goes berserk and threatens a couple of kids she's babysitting while she's ticking on Blue Sunshine Syndrome. The child actors look like they're pretty well taken care of in this one. There are a couple of kind of scary moments, but I think that the kid actors stay on point enough to make me think that they weren't particularly threatened by the scary bits in this film. But the movie has a really odd feel to it, in a good way. It's a lot of fun to see. The production value is good, but having Zalman King play the protagonist is an odd choice. I think one of the things that would have made this movie stronger is to have a more personable actor playing the protagonist. Now, Zalman King went on to become a movie producer and director. He did all of those 1990s Red Shoe Diaries movies for HBO, which were a series of soft erotic movies done for television, or at least done for a streaming service. But his character isn't at all likable, personable, and that weakens our linkage to the peril his character is supposed to be going through. One of the things with horror movies is you've got to have a clear idea of who your viewpoint character is and how you want that viewpoint character's arc to change and how you want the threat to manifest for that viewpoint character. Jerry Zipkin is just not a good viewpoint character. It's a good, solid 1970s science fiction horror. And again, it is science fiction. It's the effect of a chemical which changes the chromosomes of people and turns them into maniacs. That's at its core a science fiction concept. Now, the direction by Jeff Lieberman's pretty good. There's a scene where the politician Ed has a political rally in a shopping centre which goes into incredibly surreal things. There's a little act before he does his speech, which is a couple of marionettes. One's a marionette of Barbra Streisand, the other one's a marionette of Frank Sinatra. And the marionettes are doing Barbra Streisand and Frank Sinatra songs. And it's deeply creepy, and you think, where the hell is this coming from? And there's also a scene which is cross-cut from the political rally to this scene, where Ed's assistant, who, unbeknownst to anybody, is affected by Blue Sunshine, meets up with Jerry's girlfriend in a disco. So you've got that pivoting to disco as well, which again is a pivot away from the 1960s counterculture to a more facile worldview as disco became big in the 1970s. Unfortunately, the production couldn't find a disco in Los Angeles because disco was still big in New York at the time, hadn't reached Los Angeles until 1978, when things like Thank God It's Friday came out. That is a country and western bar redecorated to play the disco. It's there almost as a cultural touch point for the times, but there's a little bit in there where he goes berserk in the disco and then runs into the shopping centre because the disco for some reason is attached to the shopping centre and spoils Ed's rally. And the assistant to Ed is a big ex-football player who's going berserk and killing people and running amok in this shopping centre. And Jerry has to track him down and shoot him with a tranquilizer dart. It's a mad film. It's a good film. It's got a Blu-ray release at the moment in America. It's one of those kind of B-picture 1970s movies that I love. I saw it in the cinema when it first came out, and the goriness that's in there was very confronting for 1977. We even get a couple of cameos in there as well. Alice Ghostley, who was on Bewitched and a whole bunch of other TV shows, and was in the original New Faces of 1952 that Mel Brooks debuted in on Broadway. She turns up as a neighbour who gives Jerry a lot of information about one of the murders. And at the start of the movie, we get Brian James from Blade Runner turning up, as well as one of the party guests when one of the people at the party goes berserk and does all of the things with a chucking the lady into the fireplace stuff. So there's some very familiar faces in there. And it's an insane little film where you go, okay, you made this weird movie as a backlash to 1960s counterculture and saying that the drug use of the counterculture may have long-term effects. It was riding that particular idea, which was only partly true at best. Nobody ever got alopecia and turned homicidal using LSD in the 1960s. PCP is another thing. That was more a 70s and 80s drug. For its time, this kind of horror movie was very new. And it works well in that context. You sit down, you watch it like you're in the 1970s and just go with it. But again, having Zalman King playing the protagonist is a missed opportunity. He should be the opposite of the craziness that we get from the people who are affected by this drug, whereas his character feels kind of drugged himself. And I think that clear opposition to the craziness of the Blue Sunshine Syndrome people is what was required. You need somebody with a little humour, a little bit of charisma, and a little bit of groundedness playing the protagonist in this film, and unfortunately we didn't get that. It's the only weakness I've got in the film. I really like it as a 1970s horror, science fiction slasher, and it works. It's fun to revisit, seeing actors like Alice Gosley and Mark Goddard doing some fairly good acting in there as well. It feels a little bit at times like Taxi Driver, because again you've got the political campaign and you've got somebody running rogue within that campaign. It's got a little bit of a Taxi Driver vibe in it, it's got a little bit of a Larry Cohen vibe in it, and you should watch it. Ecological science fiction horror movies were really big in the 1970s. There were things like Frogs. There was a weird film called The Bees, which was made in Mexico with Henry Silva in it. There were the Savage Bees. There were all sorts of animal-based horror films that showed the perils of ecological damage and the impact of anthropogenic changes in the environment we're making at the time. They were ahead of their time. And a lot of films that were sending out a message of don't mess the planet up didn't get a lot of love at the time because it was still too early for a lot of people to get that message. But there is one weird film from 1977, directed by William Girdler, called Day of the Animals, which goes on that theme and gives us a crazy, good, fun, interesting adventure horror flick telling us to not mess up the planet. William Girdler was a pretty good director. He also directed The Manitou, that really weird supernatural horror film with Michael Ansara playing a First Nation shaman and Tony Curtis playing a con man, and Susan Strasberg gets an enormous lump on her back which turns into a small Indian demon. He made that film as well. Unfortunately, after he made The Manitou, he died in a helicopter crash in the Philippines while scouting locations, and we didn't get any more movies from William Girdler. But before he did The Manitou, he did Day of the Animal, which has got a pretty good cast. It's got TV famous cast, and I like it. And I'm going to leave the most interesting character for last. It stars Christopher George as a guy who does hiking tours. People get helicoptered up to the top of a mountain, and they spend 2 weeks hiking down the mountain and camping and learning about the environment and things like that. So he's running one of those gigs. And so he gets together a group of people who want to go on one of these expeditions. There's a young guy, part of a couple, played by Andrew Stevens. Richard Jacob playing a scientist who's also a camera buff who wants to do some photography up in the mountains. There's Christopher George's real-life wife, Linda Day George, playing a television journalist who's taking a break from things and is kind of over being a television journalist, and she just wants to do a bit of a hike in the mountain. There's Michael Ansara playing a guy called Santi, who's a First Nations guy who's kind of grokking the environment. Again, this is one of those movies where Michael Ansara plays a First Nations American person, even though he was Syrian by birth. 1970s, it was a different era. And we also get Leslie Nielsen in a serious role, playing an advertising executive who's a 100% arsehole. He says racist things to Santee. He tries to boss around Christopher George's tour guide. He's basically everything unpleasant about being a capitalist. This is the character that Leslie Nielsen plays. So the hiking tour goes up to the top of the mountain, and something goes wrong. Things are starting to go weird in the world. The hole in the ozone layer is forming, and it's actually addressed in a crawl at the start of the film. And the ultraviolet rays are hitting the animals at high altitudes and making them go insane, in combination with some kind of a virus which is spreading between species. So all the animals and birds start networking and attacking human beings. There are some weird moments before all the attacks start. The group is up at the top of the mountain just enjoying the view, and the whole forest and mountains go silent. And then suddenly there's all sorts of animal noises. It's like the animals are using psychological warfare against the group. Now, one of the other people on the hike is an actress called Susan Backlinie, who you've seen in a movie. She was the woman who did the stunt work at the start of Jaws, the one that does the moonlight nude swim and gets attacked by the shark. That's Susan Backlinie, and she's in this movie. She does some stunt work as well because she was essentially a stunt performer as much as she was an actress. And there's a really bad death scene for her where she kind of gets attacked by a whole bunch of eagles and then falls off a cliff. It's the one ropey bit of special effects work in this film, so I'll get that part over with first. The other person who's on the trip that I like a lot is an actress called Ruth Roman, who was a glamour queen in the late 40s and 50s, and later went on to do more mature roles. And there was always a kind of earthy groundedness about Ruth Roman in roles. She was attractive, and even as an older woman, she was one of those people where you'd like to go out for a drink and dinner with. And one of the things that the cast and crew said about this movie, which I love, is that everybody had a good time making it. There wasn't any ego, there wasn't any bullshit, there wasn't any vying for position. All of these people were professionals and knew what they were doing, and they all had a good time making this film up in the mountains. So we cross-cut between the people on the hiking trail and what's happening back at the base town. And things are starting to happen in the base town. People's homes are getting attacked by rats, animals are starting to go feral, and the town's starting to be attacked by the wildlife because it's still at an altitude where this phenomenon is manifesting. So we cross-cut between the weirdness that's happening with the town, and the people on the hiking trip have got no idea that things are going crazy all over the world at high altitudes. So this is a kind of apocalyptic movie, zoomed in on one particular group of people for the most part. And then the attacks start. There's a cougar attacking the camp at night, which is very interesting and very well done. There's a lot of trained animals used in this movie, and they're used really well. There's the eagle attack. There are snake attacks when one of the survivors gets back to town. The group split up, and Leslie Nielsen takes a bunch of people up to a watchtower for park rangers, which is at a higher altitude. He's decided he wants to go up there and see if there's a radio he can use. And so a group of people go off with him, whereas the main group stays with Michael Ansara and Christopher George and Linda Day George and Richard Jekyll. So we get the groups splitting up, and these attacks start happening a lot. And all through the film, right from the very start, there are crosscuts to animals and birds watching this hiking tour from a distance and eventually getting closer. And eventually they get closer and make the people who are on the tour aware of their presence. And so you've got that creeping anticipation that things are going wrong, and that the predatory birds and the animals are just waiting for the right moment to attack. It's an underrated film, and it has moments of true madness in it as well. If you ever wanted to see a movie where a shirtless Leslie Nielsen attacks a grizzly bear in a thunderstorm at night, this is the movie for you, because eventually this phenomenon starts influencing people. And one of the first people it influences is Leslie Nielsen's asshole advertising executive, who starts going truly crazy. He stabs one guy in the stomach with a pole and kills him, and then starts trying to assault the girlfriend, all during a thunderstorm at night. And then a grizzly bear comes along, and he looks up and goes, "Yeah, I could take you," and tries to attack the grizzly bear. I love stuff like that in movies. I like those moments of true gonzo craziness that you get in a lot of 1970s B exploitation movies. They're joyous fun, and you go, yeah, look, Frank Drebin's attacking a bear. And you just go with it, and I love it when it happens. This movie, even though it really wasn't in tune with the zeitgeist of the time, people were still very skeptical about the hole in the ozone layer and environmental damage caused by people and all of that thing. And the ecological message was very controversial politically in a number of countries, America and my own as well, and in the UK. And so it was one of those movies that had a message that was a little too soon for the room, but it plays better these days. And the horror, when it does ramp up, really goes strong. There are dog attacks, there are snakes just sitting and waiting for people in pickup trucks. There are all sorts of weird and wonderful and unexpected ambushes by these animals who, for some reason, are networking and going mad, and they know where and when and how to attack human beings. I really like this movie. I think it's well worth having. I don't have a physical copy of it yet, but I think it may be on my list of movies to get a physical copy of. 1970s exploitation films of this type are the kind that I grew up watching. And this one is a good, solid, honest, professional, interesting, and at the same time, crazy movie. All the actors are on point. There's no Zalman King in this one. They're all playing their characters well. They know what the characters are supposed to be. They work well as an ensemble. There are a number of dialogue scenes and character scenes in the quieter moments that land very well, particularly between people like Ruth Roman and Michael Ansara, and between Christopher George and Linda Day George. There are some good character beats. Leslie Nielsen's character is over the top from the start, but that's the character's personality. And he does get some interactions, but it's always his character attacking other people verbally rather than interacting with them the way a lot of the other characters do. So Day of the Animals is great fun to watch. You should see it if you haven't. If you haven't seen it for a while, might be time for a revisit. Movies like this probably turn up on YouTube, but if you're a physical media collector like I am, you're going to try to find a copy of them and have a physical copy of them, because occasionally YouTube does wipe out a lot of those movies that are put up, in spite of the fact that the people who put them up don't own the rights to them. And so you can't guarantee these movies are going to be available in that format on that platform forever. So that's it for this time around. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, even leave me an emoji, hit the notification bell. You can support the channel by becoming a channel member, and you can also support the channel by becoming a patron at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies. Got another double feature for the Sunday Monday video. Got some interesting stuff planned for next Wednesday, and then of course we roll back through to Science Fiction Saturday once more. So until then, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies, watch some movies where animals go totally crazy, and so does Leslie Nielsen, and I'll catch you next time.